Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ajax Public Library's Finding Your Way, Living Safely in the Community program presented by the Alzheimer Society of Durham Region. My name is Catherine Andrew, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Public Library. Thank you for joining us this evening. I want to start by quickly covering a couple of housekeeping items. This evening's program is being recorded, so I would ask that you please keep yourself muted so that you are not heard in the recording and to minimize any distractions. The chat button is along the bottom of the screen, so if you have any questions or comments you would like to share, please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation, and our presenter, Ashley, will either get to them during the presentation or at the very end in a Q&A session. Just as a test for the chat function, if you would like to share where you're logging on from today in the chat, I would love to see where everyone's tuning in from. If you experience any technical difficulties this evening, I recommend that you exit the Zoom program and re-enter with the link that you received in your email. If you continue to experience difficulties, please place a comment in the chat and I will do my best to assist you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Ashley Ferriccioli, a Community Education Coordinator with the Alzheimer Society of Durham Region. Ashley has been working in long-term care for 13 years. She is a graduate from York University with a Bachelor of Arts honors degree in sociology, has completed a postgrad program at Georgian College for recreation and gerontology, and is currently pursuing her master's in counseling psychology. Ashley has a passion for working with people and helping people live their best lives. When not working or studying, she enjoys spending time with her 2 daughters, husband, and golden retriever. We are lucky to have her with us today, so without further ado, I will turn it over to Ashley to begin her presentation. Welcome, Ashley.
Thanks so much, Catherine, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am very pleased to be here with you. Today's topic is about finding your way and dementia-friendly communities. So it's really there to provide you with a better understanding of dementia and the needs of the people living with dementia in our community as they go about their everyday activities. And there's lots of things that we can all do to help people living with dementia live well in their community for as long as possible. And our hope is that this presentation will help you think about ways that you can support people that you know living with dementia or your community as a whole. And as Catherine mentioned, if there are any questions, please feel free to either pop them into the chat. I'll try to get to them as we go, but more than likely we'll just save it for the end, but we will save some time to go over those. So what is a dementia-friendly community? A dementia-friendly community is a place where people living with dementia and their care partners are welcomed, included, and supported. And it's a community that pays attention to the social and the physical needs of the person living with dementia. So this presentation is going to cover a general overview of what dementia is and the different types, as well as the lived experience of somebody living with dementia. It's going to cover the common signs and symptoms of dementia, some strategies for interacting with people living with dementia, and also we're going to touch on the risks of a person living with dementia getting lost and how we can support people in our community who may be lost. So why learn about dementia? What's the importance? Well, in Canada, there is over 500,000 people currently living with dementia, and that number is expected to grow exponentially. And it's estimated that by the year 2030, over 900,000 people will be living with dementia in Canada. Currently in Ontario, there's over 260,000 people living with dementia. And in Durham region alone, there's over 11,000 people. And again, these numbers are only expected to rise. So it's really important that we build that foundation of knowledge. And also, since there is no cure, which we'll get to, we need to learn to find ways that we can support people living with dementia to live in their community for as long as possible. There's also 28,000 Canadians under the age of 65 who are living with young onset dementia, and that is those who are diagnosed before the age of 65. And lastly, 46% of Canadians admit that they would feel ashamed or embarrassed if they had dementia. And this is just another key point to why we need to build that knowledge, and awareness, and really break down that stigma of dementia. People can still live well with dementia. It is a very scary diagnosis, but there are lots of supports available, which I will cover at the end as well. So what is dementia? Well, dementia is an umbrella term that we use for any disease that causes changes in the brain that will get worse over time. And these changes can include things like memory loss or problems with language, trouble with familiar tasks, etc. And dementia is really diagnosed when these changes start to affect the person's everyday life. And we often hear people talk about when their loved one is diagnosed, we saw the signs years before, but they didn't get that diagnosis, probably because there was intermittent times when a person was more forgetful or maybe disoriented. And then once it started to impact their everyday life, that's generally when we see that diagnosis. There are some conditions that cause symptoms that are similar to dementia, but are treatable, which we'll talk about in a second. So maybe in the chat box, if you're comfortable, if you wouldn't mind just sharing what types of dementia you've heard of. So once again, if you've heard of any types of dementia, if you could just pop them into the chat, that would be great. If not, we're going to cover a couple tonight. Frontal dementia, yeah, frontotemporal. Yeah, we're going to touch on that one in a minute. All right. Well, not to worry if you haven't heard of a specific one. We often use the word dementia, again, as that umbrella to cover any disease that causes changes in the brain. For some reason I can't, there we go. So there are estimated to be over 90 different types of dementias, but we're just going to quickly talk about the 4 most common types. And our first one is Alzheimer's disease, which you probably have heard of. And that accounts for about 60 to 80% of all diagnoses. And damage from Alzheimer's takes place in the hippocampus of the brain. And this is where we make our memories. And this is why our short-term memory is often an early sign of Alzheimer's disease. And eventually it will progress to other regions of the brain as well. Our second most common type is vascular dementia, and it accounts for about 20% of all cases. And it occurs with mini strokes or when there is impaired blood flow to the brain. So depending on where the stroke occurs, that will determine which cognitive loss a person will experience. And damage from multiple strokes can build up over time and increase the overall cognitive loss. So we often talk about vascular dementia like a staircase. So a person is stable for a while, then they have a decline, maybe it's another stroke or an infection, then they stabilize, and then they have a decline, and so on and so forth. Our next most common type is Lewy body dementia, and it accounts for about 5 to 15% of all cases. And a person may experience symptoms similar to both Parkinson's disease, such as rigidity or their stiffness in their muscles, tremors or shaking. They may have stooped posture or slow shuffling movements. Or they may also have symptoms similar to Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss, language, problems with language or reasoning. And with Lewy body dementia, we also see marked fluctuations in their alertness. So they may experience visual hallucinations, which is seeing things that aren't real. And often we hear about people seeing bugs on the ceiling or on the walls, or children outside their window playing. And these are very common with this type of dementia, and they often get worse during times of increased confusion. And our last type, just like somebody in the chat mentioned, is frontotemporal dementia, and it accounts for about 2 to 5% of all cases. And again, frontotemporal dementia is an umbrella term that's used for a group of rare disorders that primarily affect the frontal and the temporal regions of the brain. And these areas are generally associated with personality and behavior, emotions, language, speech, abstract thinking, and movement. And it's estimated that 20% of all frontotemporal diagnosis is people who are under the age of 65. So the bulk of diagnosis for young onset falls under frontotemporal dementia. So what's common amongst these is that they are all progressive, meaning that they will get worse over time. And there is no cure, unfortunately, not yet. So like I mentioned, there are many conditions that can create a temporary dementia or reversible dementia. You may hear it explained as. And once these conditions are treated, the symptoms are reversed or it's cured, and the brain will regain its lost function. But unfortunately, this is not true for any type of dementia. So some of the treatable conditions can include things like depression. It can mimic signs of dementia, such as mood changes or personality changes, apathy, loss of ambition, social isolation. It's also delirium. We see symptoms similar to dementia, and it can cause severe symptoms rapidly. And I mean within a matter of hours or sometimes overnight, and it's usually linked to some sort of an infection. And if it's left untreated, it can be fatal. So always something that we want to keep a close eye on. Medication side effects can also cause symptoms similar to dementia, or the side effects, not taking them properly, taking too many or too little. These can all cause a temporary dementia. Metabolic disorders, so things like liver disease, diabetes, dehydration, vision or hearing impairment. So if these things are left untreated, they can cause confusion or disorientation, which is often mistaken for dementia at the onset. Sleep disorders. So sleep is really imperative to our physical and our mental well-being. So things like sleep deprivation or insomnia, sleep apnea, these all fall under that category. And our last one here is nutritional deficiencies, such as vitamin deficiencies, or a dietary deficiency if someone's not eating or drinking properly. They can all cause similar signs and symptoms of dementia. And then we have other ones such as trauma due to falls or concussions, tumors, thyroid problems, etc. So how can we tell if a person might be living with dementia? And this is really our first step in being able to build a dementia-friendly community and also helping people find their way. First, we need that knowledge of what dementia is, but then how do we identify who someone living with dementia might be? So these are the 10 most common signs that a person living with dementia may experience. It doesn't mean that someone will experience all 10 of them, and they are in no particular order. So it's not, you go from step 1 to step 2. And also important to remember, we also say that if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. And that's because it is so very unique to each individual. So just because one thing happened in person A doesn't mean it's going to happen in person B. It doesn't mean that if the same thing happens, it's going to happen the exact same way or to the same degree. Everybody is so different with the disease. So our first sign is changes in mood and behavior. And we all have changes in our mood, but usually we can identify the reason. But a person living with dementia, their mood changes quickly with seemingly no reason at all. And the person can be laughing one minute and crying the next. And there really is no rhyme or reason to it. And it's not usually consistent with the situation. So you may be providing them directions and they're laughing, for example. So damage to the brain makes it difficult for the person to regulate their mood in relation to what's happening in the environment. So it's important to remember that their reality is different than ours. And we'll talk about shortly how we need to live in their world rather than correct them. Our second sign is problems with language. And we, again, all have moments when we can't find the right word, but a person living with dementia may struggle to find even the simple words. They may misuse words without noticing. They may use words, but without providing a clear message. Or if they speak multiple languages, they may revert back to their first language that they learned. And this can make it really difficult and challenging for us to understand the meaning of what they're trying to tell us. They may also have difficulty with comprehension. So not just about the spoken word, but they may have difficulty understanding what we are trying to say to them. And they may also have difficulty following conversations. So often we hear about people living with dementia not wanting to go to large family gatherings or something like that. And it can be overwhelming for them because there's so many people, but it's also hard for them to follow along in a conversation. Problems with abstract thinking is our next one. So the person may have trouble making sense of symbols or pictures. So things on like an ATM machine or finding the right change, they may not be able to tell the difference between a nickel and a quarter anymore, for example. They may also have trouble understanding metaphors. So if we say it's raining cats and dogs outside, they're going to take us literally and think that there are cats and dogs falling from the sky. They may also have difficulty performing familiar tasks. So we all have times when we're distracted and we may miss our stop or forget a step in a recipe. But people living with dementia start to struggle with tasks, not because they're distracted, although that may be part of it, but because they're having trouble recognizing any visual or auditory cues or remembering the sequences of steps, which makes it more difficult for them. So they may not be able to get dressed anymore or button up their shirt, things like that. They may also misplace things, and this is a common one. And again, we all misplace things. I misplace things all the time, especially when we're not paying attention. When we're stressed or when we're busy or we're distracted again, that's when we tend to misplace things. However, a person living with dementia will misplace things more often or put things in spots that don't make sense. So they may put their wristwatch in the sugar bowl because it looks like a jewelry box to them. And then they'll forget that they put them there. So then that can cause suspicion. They may think that people are trying to steal from them. And then it results in that lost trust as well. We can also see a loss of initiative. So loss of initiative with dementia is different than with mental illness like depression. And that's often a question we get. So with apathy, the person enjoys participating in activities, but they're not able to initiate that activity on their own. Whereas with depression, there's usually that emotional connection. They don't feel up to it today. They don't want to see people, things like that. People with dementia can also have depression though, which we should also make sure that we get assessed by a professional. If the person doesn't want to engage in activities that they usually enjoy, even when they're supported, we should probably talk to their doctor. So if a person went to church every Sunday and now they're not wanting to go anymore, even though you're offering to go with them or to help them, that may be the sign that we are looking for depression, and speak to their doctor about that. Disorientation of time and space. So the person may come to their program or an appointment at the wrong day or show up at the wrong time, or they may forget it altogether, or they may go to the wrong location. So the person may say something that's maybe not consistent with the here and now. They may mention that they're wanting to go to a store that closed years ago. They may say that they're just going to go down the road to Zellers. And again, it's that disorientation of time and space. The person may get turned around even in a familiar environment and become lost. So they may have walked every day for the last 20 years in the same route around their block, and now they're starting to get lost. This is also a sign that we see quite often. So in this circumstance, we want to remain calm and reassure them that you're there to help. And we're going to look at some communication strategies that we can use as well. We also see memory problems that disrupt daily life. So people living with dementia may have problems making memories. And if it's something like Alzheimer's disease, right, it starts in the hippocampus, which is where we make our memories. So they can't retain those. So they won't be able to recall them, or they won't be able to recall that they've even forgotten something because that memory was never recorded for them. They may also have memory lapses that can have a great impact on their day-to-day life. So again, they may miss appointments, they may forget their PIN, they may forget to pay their bills, turn the oven off, things like that. We also see changes in personality. So the person may experience personality changes that are out of character for them, that are significant enough to cause concern. So for example, if someone was a quiet introvert their whole life, and now they're inviting strangers into their home, that's a dramatic change that we want to keep an eye out for. And our last one is impaired judgment. And this is one that really puts the person living with dementia at risk. There is a safety component to this one. So the person may make risky financial decisions, for example, that may not be consistent with their past behaviors or their beliefs. Or they may dress inappropriately for the weather. So on a hot summer's day, maybe they're wearing their winter jacket. Or on a cold winter's day, maybe they're not wearing a jacket at all. These are all things that we want to keep our eye out for. Are there any questions about some of these common signs, or have you had any interactions with someone in the community that now that we've gone over them, you recognize that maybe they were exhibiting one or more of those symptoms? Okay, I'm going to take no answers as good answers. If you do think of questions related to the signs and symptoms, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. So part of building a dementia-friendly community is also about keeping people safe. And by understanding the common signs, we can hopefully identify someone living with dementia in our community who may be lost. And we're also going to spend some time talking about how to interact with someone who may be lost as well, because that's another key component, and ensuring that they have a safe return home. So again, just really important to remember that in order for people to live well in their communities, we need to make sure that they're safe. And whether we're, a care partner for someone living with dementia, whether we're living with dementia ourselves, whether we're trying to make our business more dementia friendly, or just our community, there are lots of things that we can all do. And it starts with presentations like today. So 3 out of 5 people living with dementia will go missing at some point during the span of their disease. And this can happen early on. It can happen later on. It doesn't mean that someone will go missing, but there is definitely a heightened risk that someone can go missing. 50% of people living with dementia who are not found within 24 hours experience serious injury or even death. So again, really important that we make sure that we know how to identify someone who may be lost and how to support them if we come into contact with them, to make sure that we can get them that safe return home. And again, if you suspect that the person is missing, call 911 right away. Better to be safe than sorry. So how do we identify someone who may be lost? Well, again, back to that impaired judgment, they may be inappropriately dressed for the weather. So look for, wearing shorts on a winter day or wearing a winter jacket on a summer day. They may also be standing still or looking around for a long period of time, pacing back and forth. They may look confused or disoriented or even fearful. Or they may be repeating the same question or statement within a very short time period. It's not always going to be possible for us to identify someone who's living with dementia simply by how they look. Some people will inform you about their needs, or they may carry a card that identifies them as a companion, or we call them an independence card for somebody living with dementia. And being a dementia-friendly community and part of this doesn't mean that you have to identify people living with dementia or ask them if they're living with dementia. It just means that we need to have that awareness because there always is that potential risk. So I'm going to show a quick video here.
When Mary and Keith Harvey met on the job more than 35 years ago, neither one ever expected they would be spending their twilight years together in this apartment. Both were successful accountants and enjoyed half the year in Florida and the rest of the time at their secluded cottage in Gravenhurst. It was when they were getting ready for one of their trips to Florida that Keith noticed something alarming.
We had to apply for our passports so she couldn't sign her name. We had seen little things, but that's when it really hit home that there was a major problem. And that's when we went for the diagnosis to find out exactly what it was, what we should do about it.
Mary was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. Some of the side effects of the disease are hallucinations, anger, paranoia, and the threatening potential of going missing. Keith sought advice from the Alzheimer Society and researched ways to keep her safe. But one night at their cottage in Gravenhurst, Mary went for a long and dangerous walk.
Mary had laid down for a little nap in the back, which is where our bedroom is. And I had checked on her sort of every hour on the hour. And then I went about 5 o'clock and she was gone. The back door was wide open and the cottage is in the middle of nowhere. It is bush, it is wolves, it is bears, it is you name it. And she was gone.
Luckily, Keith found Mary walking along the road a short time later. She was found safe. After that incident, he knew he would have to take better precautions to protect her from going missing again. Keith put different types of locks on the doors, registered Mary with the Medic Alert Safely Home program through the Alzheimer Society, installed special alarms to alert him if she gets up in the night, and made sure she carries some sort of identification on her with a number to call in case she goes missing again. Today, Mary spends 3 days a week at the Meadowvale Day program, and Keith participates in a local support group for caregivers.
There's a day program run through the Alzheimer Society of Peel, and they are terrific people, very, very helpful. And then I also go to the support group every other week, and that is also very helpful. And you get to talk to the other caregivers and get ideas as to how one should handle the disease and what they're going through. And maybe I can help them with some of the things I've gone through.
Keith says, if you are a caregiver, you have to be prepared and take whatever steps you need to protect them. His words of wisdom:
the person that you're caregiving now is still the same loving person you decide to spend your life with, and that hasn't changed. It's just the disease has taken over a part of that person, and you're fighting the disease, not the person. And love and hold them anytime you can. We had a really good life. I was spoiled, and I liked that. Things change, and she put in, like the piggy bank. I use a piggy bank now. She put into the piggy bank for 30 years, so it's my turn to put a little bit back in. So, and that's one of the reasons I'm not ready to let her go.
The Harveys wanted to share their personal journey in hopes of helping others who may be experiencing the same thing. If you or someone you care about has dementia, don't hesitate. Call your local Alzheimer Society today to find out how you can make a plan to keep them safe. 3 out of 5 people with dementia will go missing at some point, often without warning. They risk serious injury or death. It's never too early to plan. The Finding Your Way program from the Alzheimer Society can help you. For people with dementia, every step counts.
Okay. Perfect. So there are some important components for interacting with a person living with dementia. And these are both when a person may be lost and just in general as well. So we want to enhance our communication, offer appropriate help, and also support their reality. So again, back to that point that their perception is their reality, and that may be a different perception and a different reality than what we see or what we know, but we need to be able to support them in their current reality. So enhancing communication, some helpful tips and tricks. If possible, take the person to a quiet place to reduce distractions. So if you come across someone who may be lost and you're in the mall, let's say, try to find a quiet space to be able to speak with them. If there's too much going on around them, they won't be able to focus on the help that we're offering. Face the person and face the person and make and maintain eye contact. Or put yourself at eye level if they're uncomfortable with eye contact. Listen and speak directly to the person living with dementia. Speak slowly and clearly in a pleasant tone. Don't assume that the person can't hear you or understand you. Allow time for the person to answer. Often a person living with dementia, it takes them longer to process the information that we're telling them. So if we're asking them a question, just making sure that we're leaving adequate amount of time for them to respond. Use short, simple sentences and share one message at a time. Again, we want to avoid slang or jargon like saying it's raining cats and dogs out, let's get inside, and avoid using those metaphors because, again, they could be misinterpreted or taken literally. We also want to ask close-ended questions like those yes/no questions and only ask one at a time. And I always like to tell people that if a person living with dementia doesn't respond and you need to ask the question again, make sure that you do it using the same exact wording, because if we change up the message that we're sending or the way that we set a message, it can become more confusing for the person because now their brain is trying to comprehend two different messages. So only rephrase the message if it's absolutely necessary, or ask that question again later. So offering the appropriate help, we want to make sure that we approach the person from the front in a friendly and open manner. Often people living with dementia lose their peripheral vision. So if we approach them from the side, it can be quite startling because they no longer have that vision. They kind of have tunnel vision. So we need to approach from the front so that they can see that we're coming. You can ask if and how you can help. Again, avoid making assumptions about what the person needs or what they're thinking. Don't say, oh, you look lost, or, oh, you look scared. Just say, I'm here to help. Is there something that you need? That yes/no question. And again, offering simple choices, provide clear instructions, and answer any of their questions, even if you've already given that information. So if they're asking the same question over and over, we often tell people to act like it's the first time you've heard it. If you're wearing a hat or sunglasses, remove those so that the person can see your facial expressions. You can get their attention and introduce yourself. And again, move in the line of their sight and then speak or touch gently if it's appropriate. And if we're giving directions, we want to make sure that we're providing visual cues or landmarks. So if we're saying, go up the road 3 blocks, that's not going to be helpful. But if we say, go up the road and turn right at the Tim Hortons, things like that. Or you could write them down for them as well. Offer to help them find their way or go with them. This is an important piece. We never just want to, identify that someone may be lost and then tell them where to go and not either help them get there or call the police or call somebody. We also want to support their reality. So recognize how the person might be perceiving the situation. Again, their perception is their reality. And while it's different from ours, we do need to recognize and understand how they're feeling in that situation. You can ask the person what you can do for them or how you can help. And we often talk about connecting, not correcting. So if someone tells you something that is inaccurate, rather than telling them that they're wrong, we're just going to connect with them. And I often use the example of an elderly person saying that they're waiting for their mom or their dad. And while in reality, we know that that's probably not true and that their parent has passed on, we need to connect with them rather than correct them. So asking them, tell me about your mom. What do you like to do with your mom? Connect with them. Don't tell them your mom has passed away. Observe the person's actions or their body language. Often what they're communicating with you is more than what their words are telling you. Do they look fearful? Do they look scared? Look for those things. Invite them to tell you more about what they're trying to do. If they're trying to get in somewhere or walking around, ask them to tell you what they're trying to do, to expand on that a little bit. Don't ask the person to multitask. So again, allowing them to do one thing at a time. If they're talking with you, that's their one task that they're doing at a time. Or if you're helping them at the ATM machine, they're focusing on the ATM machine, and then you have that conversation. We're not talking to them while they're trying to operate the machine at the same time. And again, it's the same for everybody. You're not going to have the perfect answer for every situation. It's just most important that we're making sure that the person is safe and calling for help if we need it. So if you encounter someone who appears lost or confused, you can use those interaction strategies like we just talked about, but you could also look for a medical alert safely home bracelet that we just heard about in the video. And these bracelets, just right there in the top left, are similar to ones that you would have for various other health conditions or allergies, except the writing on this one is in blue, which they only use for memory loss. If the medical alert bracelet is used for anything other than memory loss, the writing is in red. So that's how you would tell the difference. Local police services have access to this registry and this database. The OPP used to use the Vulnerable Persons Registry. They don't use that anymore, but Durham Regional Police does use that. So if you're supporting someone living with dementia and you're concerned about them going missing, you can register them with the Vulnerable Persons, and I would highly suggest getting a medical alert safely home bracelet. And then if you do encounter someone who may be lost, you can look for this bracelet. There is some information on the back, and there is a number to call that has a 24/7 service, and they will connect the next of kin or the power of attorney, whoever's listed on that person's account, to let them know that the person has been found and where you are. There's also Project Lifesaver, which is another great option as well. There are lots of like GPS tracking devices that are available nowadays as well. And then the Alzheimer Society does have Identifier Cards. So either you're a person living with dementia, you would carry the top card that says that you are living, the bottom one, that I am living with memory loss. And if they keep it in their wallet, things like that. Or if you're a person supporting someone, you can get a card that says the person I'm with has memory loss. And then that way, instead of if you're in a store or something, you don't have to explain to somebody, you could just slide the card on the table and they can read it and understand. So if you're interested in learning more about how to keep people safe, the Finding Your Way Ontario website is fantastic. And it includes information in other languages. There is family and care partner support and information. There's a whole section for first responders. So there's a lot of training being done with police, fire, and EMS about finding your way and keeping people safe in their community. There's interactive resource guides for both people living with dementia and care partners. There are downloadable resource guides, including an identification kit, which is very helpful. And then there's some online courses and some information about GPS or locating technology. So the Alzheimer Society is a not-for-profit organization. So all donations do help us continue to support the community. And if you're interested in donating or finding out more ways that you can help, please visit our website. The Alzheimer Society also has lots of great ways that we can help people living with dementia, care partners, and healthcare professionals. Anything from education and training to support and counseling. Most of our services are free with the exception of our young onset adult day program. We also have 3 memory clinics that operate out of Oshawa, Bowmanville, and Scarborough. And our services are also available in French. I also just wanted to spend a minute talking about our First Link referral program. So if you're interested in accessing any of our services, including finding your way medical or safely home, our team can work with you to develop a safety plan. But if you're interested in receiving any services, whether it be counseling or help navigating the system, the healthcare system, anything like that, I would be more than happy with you to complete a referral for you. And just what that means is I take down some information, our First Link navigators would reach out to you just to get an idea of how they can help and what services might be a benefit to you. And this, again, could include things like counseling or navigating the healthcare system, access to individual or group therapy, peer support groups, anything like that. So again, if you're interested or you have more questions about that, I'd be more than happy to speak with you after the presentation. And I will put up my contact information as well in case you wanted to reach out. So if you have a moment, we'd love your feedback about today's presentation. It takes less than 10 minutes to complete, and your feedback is very appreciated. So you can do this in one of 3 ways. You can enter the address into your browser. If you have your cell phone handy or a QR code scanner, you can just hold it up to the screen and scan that little QR code by opening your camera on your phone. And I will also post the link in the chat as well. There you go. So that is it for the presentation. Thank you again so much for having me and for joining me this evening. If there are any questions, I am more than happy to answer those for you.